Welcome back for another video, and welcome if you are new. Today I'm going to be doing my November reading wrap-up. So overall this month I read 9 books. So I have some of the physical copies here as well as some audiobooks and maybe some I already had to return. And so yeah, I think that's about how much I read the last month or two, so pretty consistent with what I have usually been reading. I also, like last month, went and wrote down the types of genres that I read this month, which was actually a little bit of a variation from what I normally read. So I read 1 romance book, 3 fantasy, which is the main difference. I don't usually read a lot of fantasy, but I've been seeing a lot of fantasy recommended recently and giving it a try. I also read 3 mystery thriller books. I would say this month, with the exception of 1 or maybe all of them, they are a little bit more on the mystery side, I would say, than thriller side, which was not necessarily what I expected, but I enjoyed this month. And then I read 1 general or literary fiction. I'm still not completely sure what the difference between those 2 genres is. And then 1 historical fiction book. Yeah, so let's go ahead and get into my reviews. So the first book that I read this month was Things We Left Behind by Lucy Score. And this is the 3rd and final book, I believe, in the Knockout. I don't know, I hear people say the series name and I am not completely sure how to pronounce it. I'm also not sure exactly where it comes from. I don't know why it's called that. It's probably a very obvious reason, but I'm not completely sure. It might be the town that they're in. But anyway, yeah, so this is the 3rd book. So I read the past 2 books within the last year or so and didn't love either of them. I think I gave them both around 3 stars. They were those fun or light, fast read type books. They are pretty thick books overall, but both of the past 2 books as well as this one I really sped through, and it's just one of those romance books. They all each have an element of kind of thriller mystery as well, which in the first book maybe made it a little bit more interesting. I feel like in the last book and this book I was kind of I don't really care, I'd rather just hear more about the romance if I'm really putting the effort into reading this romance book. I don't care about all of the random things that are going on, and honestly couldn't remember between the books since I didn't really care as I was reading them, because it kind of continues to connect and they name random bad guys that were referenced in last books and I don't really know who's who there. But overall this book is about Lucian Rollins and Sloane Walton. And so Lucian and Sloane were both in the past couple books and had a plot line of completely hating each other. So in this book you start to hear why they hate each other and then see if a romance is gonna ensue from that. But yeah, overall I gave this one 2.5 stars. You might be wondering, why would I read the 3rd book in a series when I knew I didn't like the last 2? I don't know. Just because it was a light, fast romance, and since there was only 1 more in the trilogy, I just figured why not give it a try. Overall very cringy, a lot of reasons that are revealed for why they weren't talking, or some type of argument they're having, I felt was kind of a letdown overall and didn't really seem the most logical. But I didn't hate reading it, but I wouldn't really recommend this series overall unless you just want a nice, cheap, fast read romance. And then the second book that I read this month, I don't have the copy of it because I listened to the audiobook of this one, and this is Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers. And I hadn't really seen this anywhere, but someone recommended it to me, so I decided to try it out. And this is a mystery thriller, but again I would say it wasn't really very thriller-like, a little bit more like a mystery, kind of cozy, laid back. So basically this woman Vera Wong, she owns a tea shop and she's kind of lonely, doesn't really have a ton of friends or family in her life, and one day she wakes up and finds a dead body in her tea shop. And so she decides that she's going to start investigating this case. The police say it's not a murder, it's probably just was a natural death, and she's convinced it's a murder, so she starts her own investigation, and along the way kind of forms her own family, and there's kind of like interconnecting relationships there that are starting. So yeah, I thought this book was very wholesome and I really enjoyed it. It was a really good audiobook to listen to, and I gave this one 4 stars overall. So yeah, I would really recommend it. The next book that I read, I do have a physical copy of again, and that is Crown of Midnight by Sarah J. Maas. This is the second or third, I guess, depending on what order you read them in, book in the Throne of Glass series. And so I read Throne of Glass last month and really liked it a lot more than I thought I would. I think I gave it 4 or possibly 4.5 stars. So I decided to give the second book a try. And this one, again, I really liked. So I guess to give you a little bit more background, as I mentioned when describing the first one, the main character is an assassin, and she's kind of in the first book competing for becoming the king's assassin. And so I obviously can't really describe what happens in this book without giving spoilers from what happened in the first book, but this is continuing to follow Selena Sardathian and just her more of her adventures in this fantasy world. So I really enjoyed this, and if I didn't already say, I give this 4.5 stars. And I have just started reading now the prequel to these books and have really been enjoying that as well. So I think this might be a new favorite fantasy series of mine so far, although there are quite a few books still to go, so we'll see. But I'm going to continue trying to read a book or so of this series every month and get through it. So then the next book that I read was The Wishing Game, and this is another one that I listened to the audiobook of, so I don't have the copy here. This one was about this woman who lives in California, and she works as like a teacher's aide, I believe. And there's this this boy in the school that she works at that she really wants to adopt. And they give you a little bit more backstory there of like why she's so attached to adopting this boy. At first it kind of seems like a little bit random that there's just this boy in a school that she's so convinced she needs to adopt. But anyway, she wants to adopt this boy, and he really wants her to adopt him, and she tutors him, and so she's able to like kind of get closer to him. They have formed this strong relationship, and they play what they call the wishing game, which is basically they just say their wishes, and their wish obviously is for her to adopt him, them to become a family. And then there's also kind of this storyline of there's an author that both of them have read, both the boy that wants to be adopted and the woman. That's this very long book series. I kind of thought of it as like Magic Tree House or something, where there's just like a bunch of these books that a lot of kids have all read and have really like fallen in love with them. And so the author of those books has not released books in a long time, but he announces that he's going to be releasing a new book, but only to like the winner of this competition he's going to have, and he's selecting a few people to compete in the competition, and one of them happens to be the main character, and so she goes to what's called Clock Island, which is what the book is based on, I believe, and so she's kind of competing to get this copy of the book, which she also thinks, because this book would be worth so much money, could really help her achieve her goal of adopting this boy. So yeah, it was a very like wholesome book, just like general literary fiction of her really wanting to adopt this boy. And yeah, I overall gave it 3.5 stars. I would just say, like, I feel like even describing it now, I'm like kind of struggling to remember what happened. I enjoyed listening to it. Don't think 3.5 stars is a bad rating, but I just wasn't like especially invested, and I feel like after I read it, I just could tell like I'm not really going to remember this in the long term, or like if someone asked for a book recommendation, this would never just like come into my head as a recommendation. But it does have very good ratings on Goodreads. It has like 4.2 or so stars on Goodreads, so obviously some people liked it more than I did, and maybe you want to give it a try. Especially if you just want like a nice wholesome read. It also has like a lot of riddles in it that she's solving in this challenge, so if you really like riddles and things like that, you would probably like this book, because you can see if you can solve some of them on your own. Okay, and then the next book that I read, I just went and grabbed from my bookshelf because I actually forgot that I had gotten the physical copy of this book, and that is Then She Was Gone by Lisa Jewell. And so I got this book from a library book sale over the summer, I believe, and I had been interested in reading it, but hadn't gotten around to it. I think I'd kind of heard mixed reviews, some people saying it was a bit slow and dark, and other people saying they enjoyed it. And then I read, what was it, last month? Oh yes, I read None of This Is True. I think that was last month. Could have been the month before last. And I gave that one 4.5 stars. And I think that is probably one of my favorite thrillers that I read because I felt like it didn't really follow the normal predictable thriller category of events, I guess. And I think I've just been reading so many thrillers lately that follow like this same exact order of things that occur that it just becomes very repetitive and much less enjoyable. So I decided to try this one because I wanted to see if the same was true for this book and if I would enjoy this one as well. And I would say that the same is true. It doesn't quite follow like the normal thriller plotline. It's a little bit different. And to give, I guess, a little bit more information here, so there's a girl, Ellie, and she has disappeared, and then you've gone like maybe 10 plus years in the future. And her mother, Laurel, is trying to kind of put her life back together, and then she meets this very charming man, and soon she has become a big part of his life. She's met his daughters, she's basically living with him, and one thing she notices is that one of his daughters looks very similar to her own daughter that went missing, and she kind of thinks that's a little weird, but it's probably just in my head that I'm making these parallels to my own daughter since she's at a very similar age of when her daughter went missing, I believe. So yeah, she's kind of in this relationship, but still continuing to ask questions about what happened to her daughter, and you're kind of flashing back and forth in time between her daughter's storyline and her storyline of meeting this guy and kind of starting to ask some questions. And so overall, I gave it 4 stars. I have like kind of mixed feelings on that. I maybe would say a 3.5 now. I'm a little unsure. And my reason for that is that I feel like I knew what was going to happen this entire book. Like, and I almost felt like they weren't even trying to have a twist. Like, there wasn't a point where I felt like the author introduced a twist and I was like, oh, I already saw that coming. I just felt like it was obvious the entire book what had happened, and then the narrator, main character, Laurel, the mom, was slowly figuring that out, and I thought it was an interesting story and overall enjoyable, but I didn't really feel like it was thriller in the way that there's like twists and turns that you didn't see coming. I just felt like it wasn't written that way. But then I did read the Goodreads reviews, and some people were talking about like the twists that happened in this book, and I was like, I don't know. I didn't really see that, but I still enjoyed it overall. I gave it 4 stars. I think it is a little bit dark, so if you don't like more of like the dark thriller side of things, then this book is probably not for you. But overall, I definitely recommend None of This Is True over this book, but if you liked None of This Is True and kind of want to try out another book that has a little bit of a different type of plotline than most thrillers, then I would definitely try this out. It was a very fast read, very short chapters, and so yeah, I would recommend it overall. Nothing crazy. Okay, the next book that I read was Goodnight, Irene. This one is historical fiction, and it is following these 2 women who they basically, for different reasons in their life, are kind of unsatisfied, and this is taking place during World War II, and they decide to enter service as, I believe they're Red Cross. Yeah, they enlist in the Red Cross and head to Europe, but they're actually working at something that I didn't know existed in World War II, and probably most people don't know, was that they were basically enlisted to raise the spirits of the troops. So they would go around in these little trucks, and they had a name for them that I can't remember, where they would go around to different places where people were stationed, park their trucks, and it was kind of like a food truck where they would serve donuts and coffee to the soldiers, and they were also just supposed to always act very happy and engage with the soldiers and talk to them and just make them feel more at home. And so it kind of just followed these two different characters and their experience doing that, and I think it's based off of like the author's mother, I believe. So yeah, it was interesting to see just from like a very different point of view, some point of view that I did not know existed. And, you know, in some ways they, you know, didn't really experience what maybe like a soldier would in the war, because they were just, you know, like running a food truck. But then there's other times where they were working on the front lines and became much more involved in the actual war than they were ever hoping or planning to. So I thought this was good overall. It did start out very slow for me, I would say. I think, honestly, I got like almost halfway through and was thinking it was probably gonna be like a 3-star read. I just felt like not a lot was happening, and I wasn't sure if more was going to happen. But then it really did start to pick up, and it got really good towards the second half of the book, and I ended up giving it 4 stars overall. I think it's definitely a book for if you really like World War II historical fiction, which I do enjoy. And if that's you, then I would recommend. If not, you probably would just find it a little bit slow. But yeah, I overall did enjoy this book. Okay, and then the next book that I read this month was The Song of Achilles, and this is a book that I'd had on my TBR for a long time and really wanted to read it because I'd heard such good things about it. But I was number like 300 at the library on hold for this book, so I finally got it this month, so I was very excited to read it. And this is following, I'll just kind of read the beginning of this little description here because I feel like this is gonna do a better job describing Greek mythology and what this book covers than I could on my own. But it says, Achilles, the best of all Greeks, son of the cruel sea goddess Thetis and the legendary king Peleus, and I'm probably saying these Greek names wrong, is strong, swift, and beautiful, irresistible to all who meet him. Patroclus is an awkward young prince exiled from his homeland after an act of shocking violence. Brought together by chance, they forge an inseparable bond despite risking the god's wrath. And so really it's primarily following, I assumed it was going to be following Achilles, but it's following Patroclus. Again, I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, but and he's kind of becomes Achilles' best friend, as well as he has like an official role he's given him as kind of like his assistant, but really they're just best friends plus possibly more. And it's really just following, you know, originally Achilles is just this boy, and then he's the son of a goddess, but then his dad is immortal, and so there's this big war that is starting to happen, and he's kind of called to serve because he is Achilles. He's rumored to be this legendary, impossible to beat warrior, and so obviously people want him involved in this war on their side so that they can win the war. And so yeah, it's just kind of following all that takes place in there and really heavily following specifically their relationship. So it's kind of a story of friendship, but then also a lot of Greek mythology in there, as well as kind of all these battles that are happening. I would definitely recommend this if you were a fan of all of the like Lightning Thief, Percy Jackson books, and now you're maybe more of an adult and want to read something that's a little bit more like the adult version of those books, I guess. If you like Greek mythology, you would definitely really like this. I wasn't sure how much I liked Greek mythology. I did overall like the Percy Jackson books, but I did end up really liking this. I gave it 4.5 stars. I felt like I just got pretty invested into the characters. I think it starts out a little bit slow, where you're kind of just figuring everything out and you're not sure what direction this story is going in, and I'm sure even based off my description you probably don't have a great idea because it's kind of one of those books that follows a pretty long span of time and just the experiences that happen through that. But I would highly recommend this book. Okay, so I now have 2 more books to talk about. One of those I have here, and this is The Good Sister by Sally Hepworth, and this is a thriller, mystery, I guess, I thought it was just like a very stereotypical thriller, and there definitely are like thriller elements. Like I would say the overall plot line is leading you to a thriller type book, but it also is kind of a romance for most of the book. So this follows Fern, and she is a librarian, and she has a twin sister, Rose, that she is very, very close with. Fern also is kind of, this says, she avoids crowds, bright lights, and loud noises as much as possible. She has to have a very carefully structured life, and disrupting her routine can be dangerous. So she just has like certain things that she struggles with and needs her life to be a certain way, and she really relies on her sister Rose to help her with this. And then Fern kind of meets this guy. I guess they don't say on the back of the book. But Fern meets this man. She ends up becoming pregnant with this man, which she kind of had ulterior motives for because she knew her sister Rose wanted to get pregnant and couldn't. So you're kind of following the romance of this between this man and Fern, but at the same time you're starting to see that there's something a little bit sketchy about Rose and her want to get pregnant, and also like she really wants to have Fern's child. I don't know, you can just tell something's a little bit off, and they're also kind of doing a little bit of flashbacks to their upbringing when everything started, and there were some mysterious things in the past, and you're still kind of figuring out what's going on. So yeah, like I would say it felt like a romance for the first like 80% of the book almost, and then it gets to be like a thriller at the end, which I thought was enjoyable. It was a pretty like light romance that was just very sweet, and then it picked up a bit at the end. But yeah, I would recommend this one as just like a quick read. It's a very short book. I read it in like 2 days, I think. Yeah, nothing crazy, but I thought it was pretty good, and I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. So yeah, I didn't have strong feelings, but I enjoyed it. Okay, the last and final book of this month, which also is a bit of me cheating, I guess. So I'll explain what I mean there. The other book that I was reading this month, and this was an audiobook that I was listening to, was Iron Flame. So this is the second book in, I don't know what the series is called now, but there was Fourth Wing, and now this is Iron Flame. So Fourth Wing I talked about a couple months ago. I read it, and because it had insanely high Goodreads reviews, and I did really enjoy it, and I actually mentioned it in some of my my 5-star book video as one of my honorable mentions. I think I ended up giving it 4.5 or maybe 4 stars, and I really enjoyed it as a fantasy book, and so I was excited to read the second one. And so I went ahead and got the audiobook, and the reason I say I would kind of cheated in calling this a November book is, so it was a 28-hour audiobook, which I'll talk about that in a minute, but I read 27 hours of it in November, and I was really trying to finish it in November, and I just could not get through the last hour before it turned December 1st, and so I'm still going to call it a November read because I put 27 hours of that in November. And yeah, so I guess overall for my review, if you're not familiar with the Fourth Wing books, it's basically following this main character, Violet, who goes to this dragon school, I guess, in very simplified terms. You kind of like take on a career and go to a different school based off what career you want, and so she's going to become, I don't know what the correct name is, but basically a dragon rider. So the first book is kind of following her first getting to this school and learning how to become a dragon rider and everything. And then the second book, I can't really describe again without giving away spoilers from the first book, but it's getting a little bit farther into her journey. This book I gave 3 stars. So that's not like a horrible rating, but it was like a pretty big drop down from my 4.5 star rating that I gave the first book, because I was really hopeful after that one that this was like a new fantasy series that I would enjoy. But I don't know, I just felt like this book didn't have a ton of direction. There was a lot, like it did not need to be a 28-hour audiobook. I don't know how many pages the actual physical book is, but I'm sure it's a lot. and there was just a lot of repetition. I felt like a battle would happen and something would kind of get resolved, and then there would be another battle, or like Violet and her love interest would get in an argument and then would kind of resolve it, and then they'd get in like the same argument 2 chapters later. So I just felt it was so much repetition of the same thing happening over and over again and nothing really being achieved. And I wasn't sure if I was alone in feeling this, but I then started to see a lot of TikToks of people saying the same thing, where they felt like this book was probably very rushed because of how well Fourth Wing did, and because of that maybe didn't have all of that in-depth editing to really narrow it down to all of the important good elements of it, because I think it did have good elements, and then I overall enjoyed listening to it. But I would also say, because it was so long and because I was listening to it as an audiobook, there were definitely areas where I just completely zoned out, and then I would zone back in, and because it kind of repeated itself, I would not always go back and rewind like I normally would with an audiobook. I just kept listening. Because of that, I definitely missed some things. So some of what I was confused on with a few things near the end is probably due to that. Also, I feel like in audiobooks it can just be hard to keep track of a lot of characters. For example, Violet has a lot of friends that she'll reference, especially when they're all fighting on their dragons together, and she's just like, then this person did this person did this. I couldn't keep track of who in the world she was talking about at any given time. I just knew those are generally her friends, these are generally these other people, and I could not keep track of all the specifics there. And then when the end finally happened, I was like, I think I maybe understood that, but I had to Google and make sure I actually knew what even happened at the end of the book, which I felt like was a little bit weird. But yeah, overall, I don't know, hopefully the next book is better. I may or may not give it a try. I'm not sure how invested I am at this point, especially if it's another 28-hour long book. I think that's just too long for me as an audiobook. Maybe I would have enjoyed it more reading the physical copy, but as an audiobook, I can't keep paying attention for that length of time, especially when a lot of it is people fighting on dragons, and I can just kind of tune it out for a little bit. So yeah, that is all of the books that I read in November. So overall, let's see, I have 6 physical copies here, as well as 3 audiobooks I listened to. So usually I listen to some more audiobooks in a month, but since I had Fourth Wing, which was basically, Iron Flame, which was basically the length of 2 or 3 books, I only made it to 3 audiobooks. But yeah, I feel like I had a couple really good reads this month. A lot of just okay, average reads, nothing 5 stars, so hopefully in December I'll find a new 5-star book. We'll see. But yeah, it was still a very enjoyable reading month, and I'm excited to read some more this month. So yeah, I'll see you all in a month or in a couple weeks. We'll see.